Why is it so hard to diet? Why is it so hard to maintain a calorie deficit? Or why is it so hard to lose weight and keep it off? So a lot of people talk about how, if they lost weight and then maybe gained it back, it must have been a lack of willpower. Or maybe they just went back to their old ways. Or a lot of it is just self-blaming that they didn't do it well enough, right? And so what I'm actually here to talk about today is a research study that shows that it's the opposite, that the longer you're on a diet or trying to maintain a calorie deficit, actually the harder it is to follow because of how our bodies adapt. So what I want to talk about is actually first some little bit of research that Kevin Hall did. And so for those of you who haven't heard me reference Kevin Hall, he's a guy who works at NIH. And the reason we like his studies is because what he does is with his participants, he actually admits them at NIH so that he can measure literally every single calorie that they eat. And he also has what's called a metabolic chamber, which is quite literally a room that someone sits in for 24 hours. And it's the most accurate way to measure metabolism. So he does the absolute best he can to eliminate any sort of human error with reporting of food or metabolic breakdown or things like that. Okay. And so what I want to talk about initially is he's basically trying to come up with the best mathematical formula that he can for calories in versus calories out. Now, we've all heard that, right? That if you're going to lose weight, it has to be calories in versus calories out. But he doesn't think it's necessarily that linear or that balanced. And so the equation that he's trying to research showed exactly that. So in his research, what he found is that when someone loses 1 kilogram of body weight, okay, so that's roughly 2 pounds. So 1 kilogram of body weight or 2 pounds, when someone loses that amount, their metabolism decreases by roughly 25 calories per day, but their appetite, so how much they want to eat, increases by 95 calories a day. So it's kind of like your body's working against you a little bit, right? So you're losing this weight, but your metabolism is dropping and your appetite is increasing. So that's important for the study that I'm going to reference in a second, but I think it's interesting that that's the case, right? Because that already goes to show that that scale is not perfectly even as it pertains to calories in, calories out. Now, the research study that I want to talk about today was actually, it's called the Calorie Study, and it was actually sponsored by the National Institute of Aging, which is part of NIH. And what they did is they had all of their participants start a 25% calorie deficit, which when we're looking at what they were eating before the actual diet started, that deficit ended up being an average of 700 calories, right? So most of these people all started roughly a 700 calorie deficit. And so they followed these individuals for 2 years. And let me just make a note that how they actually tracked this is they used a technique called doubly labeled water technique. And I'm not going to go into all the detail about how that works and the science behind it, but basically it's a very accurate way to measure someone's calorie expenditure, calorie intake, and body composition. Okay, so again, that's how they kind of track them throughout the study, this 2-year-long study. So again, 25% calorie deficit, which was roughly 700 calories. And what they found for the participants is within that first 6 months, weight dropped, right? And then from 6 months to 1 year, it actually started to plateau. And then for the whole second year, so from 1 year to 2 year, it either plateaued or slightly increased. And so everybody's like, well, what the heck happened? And so again, they use the doubly labeled water technique to figure out some of these more specific numbers. And what they realize is that over time, that deficit did change. So whereas the people initially were great at keeping that 700 or 25% calorie deficit, slowly over time, right around the 6-month mark, those people started to only have a deficit of about 300 calories or no deficit at all. So you're probably thinking like, okay, well, yeah, so then they gave up on the diet. So what's your point? Hear me out. And so what they found actually, right, is not that these people went back to their old ways or gave up on the diet or cheated more or anything like that. What we have to look at is how their weight changed. And then remember back to that equation, the 25 and the 95, which I'll talk about in a second. It all starts to come together. So in that first 6 months, they looked back at the participants and most of them lost an average of 10 kilograms, which is going to be roughly 22 pounds, right? So they lost that much weight in the first 6 months. Now, if we do the math that we talked about from that equation earlier, where, your appetite actually increases by 95 calories per day per kilogram of body weight lost, that means that these people over time, especially at that 6-month mark, were hungry for about 1,000 calories more per day than they were at the start. So it's not that they gave up on the diet, it's that their body was hungrier and hungrier, making it harder and harder to maintain the 700 calorie deficit. So in essence, these people weren't trying less hard or giving up or cheating more. It's that the diet became harder and harder to follow because their appetite was stronger and stronger and stronger. And so in the research, what they figured out is that as time went on, at first, they were able to maintain the 700 calorie deficit because that's kind of what it felt like to the body. But as the appetite got stronger, it more made it feel like for the body that it was more like an 1,000 calorie deficit, and then 1,500 calorie deficit, and then 2,000 calorie deficit, which is why it became harder and harder to follow and people started eating just a little bit more, right? So their lack of willpower was not the result. If anything, they were trying harder and harder, but they were getting less and less success because of their appetite. Now, part of that is because of how the body adapts, right? So we talked about that equation in that research study, and so it's not a lack of willpower. But one of the big things that changes, and I've mentioned this before in one other video, is as we start to lose weight, your leptin, which is a hormone in the body, actually decreases. And so what leptin is responsible for is when that is lower, we're going to experience increased appetite and decreased metabolism. So as you can see, your body's adapting to this change in weight. And so I just want to point this out because I don't want you to feel like you're a failure if you tried some behavior change or lifestyle change and it didn't go the way that you thought it would. Or I don't want you to feel like a failure if maybe you lost weight and now it's plateaued. And I definitely don't want you to feel like a failure if you lost weight and then gained it back, because the body is fighting against you. Now, that's not meant to be very discouraging. It's more meant to show that weight loss needs to be really, really slow. And like we say all of the time, we want to heal you from the inside out. And so for some people, you may be perfectly healthy on the inside, and despite what you think your weight should be, you might not need to lose any weight at all. And all you're going to do is put yourself on this constant diet yo-yo cycle. So all of that to say is we want to heal you from the inside out, and it's most important to make sure that you're fueling your body well, you have good energy, you're not having cravings, you're moving your body, doing things that you love, and those are the main things to focus on as opposed to that number on the scale. Don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. Thanks for being here.